And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I'm Troy David Phillips. I'm at Flashback Comics in Woodbridge, Virginia. And today I'm going to answer a question that I get asked an awful lot here in the store, which is, what are my favorite comic stories? That's actually a very long and exhaustive list, and I am not going to go through every single one of my favorites today. Maybe next time, but not this time. But I am actually going to talk about my 5 favorite DC stories of all time. So here we go, strap yourselves in. In no particular order, I'm going to hit you first with John Byrne's Man of Steel Superman reboot. Now, in 1985, we had the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which shrank the multiverse into a single universe. And at the end of this, writer-artist John Byrne was lured away from Marvel, where he had been doing Alpha Flight and the Incredible Hulk and the Fantastic Four and a great many other things, over to DC Comics, and he would put a signature stamp on a great many things at DC, but most especially on the Superman franchise at that time. He started with a 6-issue limited series called The Man of Steel. This takes us back to the destruction of Krypton and the rocket carrying the baby, actually a birthing matrix, from Krypton to Earth, where he's found by the Kents. It's a story we all know, but John Byrne filled in the gaps with things that we hadn't seen. He revisited characters like Lois Lane and Lex Luthor, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, Bizarro, and he also kind of repainted Krypton. He gave us this more sterile, scientific Krypton. Think of the Vulcans from Star Trek. The Kryptonians took that to an even further extension. The 6th and final issue, and this is why it's my favorite, is Superman addressing the fact that while he comes from Krypton, it's a culture that he really didn't know anything about. Intellectually, he was aware of his origins, but it was in fact the Kent family that gave him his values and his moral center. And so Superman identified himself as an Earthman, as a Smallville, Kansas native, as our American hero. And this goes back to that truth, justice, and the American way. That is the essence of Superman. Man of Steel by John Byrne is definitely one of my all-time favorites. Now, that would be Superman. Another one of my absolute favorites, bar none, is Frank Miller's Batman Year One. Those of you who have read it or seen the animated series, you already know how good this thing is. Once again, Frank Miller takes the basic story of Batman without really changing anything, but he modernizes it, puts a crime noir spin on it, and takes us very quickly from the death of the Waynes into Bruce Wayne returning after a 10-year absence to Gotham City and beginning his one-man war on crime. His one-man war on crime did not begin with him putting the costume on and swinging into the streets of Gotham. It actually involved him wearing more street disguises and figuring out how he was going to go about waging this one-man war on crime. It also introduced us to a young Detective Gordon. Now, those of you who have seen the Gotham television series, you think of Jim Gordon as the policeman working on the Waynes murder. Well, actually, no, he wasn't. Jim Gordon was a native Gothamite returning to Gotham with his first wife, who was just given birth to their son, James, and he is just a few years older than Bruce himself. Batman Year One is fantastic. Not only does it introduce us to Bruce Wayne, we see him become Batman. Not only does it introduce us to Jim Gordon and Detective Sarah Essen, but it also gives us a look at Selina Kyle, who, seeing Batman in action on the street, this inspires her to put on the cat costume and begin her one-woman crime wave, if you will. Batman Year One jumpstarts a lot of the Batman mythology. So there is a Catwoman limited series that comes out after that. There were successors, Batman Year 2 and Batman Year 3. One of those was in Detective Comics, the other was in Batman. Batman Year 3 introduced us to Tim Drake, who would become the third Robin after the death of Jason Todd. We also got Batman Legends of the Dark Knight out of that. And Legends of the Dark Knight comes after year one, but it's very early in the development of Batman's career. So we see him figuring out, again, how he's going to wage this one-man war on crime, whether it's developing the Batmobile or figuring out how to cover his tracks when he's profiled by Hugo Strange, and even Batman's early forays into using the drug Venom, which he decides ultimately not to do. He's looking for an edge, but this is not the edge he wants. All of that is an outgrowth of Batman Year One, and that's why Batman Year One is one of my all-time absolute favorites. That's 2 of the 3 icons, and no top 5 list would be complete without addressing the 3rd icon, and that would be the Amazonian Maid of Might, Wonder Woman. My favorite Wonder Woman stories happened during the time that George Perez was heading that book. George Perez, as you probably already know, is a fantastic artist and an excellent writer and a heck of a nice guy who adores his fan base. You've seen George Perez on the new Teen Titans, and I'm going to address that one in my top 5 as well. And George Perez, of course, had cut his teeth over at Marvel Comics. You'd seen him on the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Creatures on the Loose with the Man-Wolf, etc. One of my absolute favorites is the first 6 issues, the Ares incident. Now, this 6-issue story arc not only brings Wonder Woman to man's world from the island of Themyscira, but it reintroduces Ares, and it gives Ares a mythological, epic scale of menace. Ares ascends to a platform of villainy. He is most assuredly a villain like Darkseid, the apocalyptic god of evil. It's a good, fresh look, and George Perez is most definitely the kind of guy to give a character a good, fresh look. So, Wonder Woman, the Ares incident, that is definitely in my top 5 all-time faves. Another one, and since I addressed it, I'll go ahead and say it now, comes from the pages of New Teen Titans. George Perez, with longtime partner collaborator Marv Wolfman, gave us the Judas Contract. The Judas Contract brought Deathstroke the Terminator and Terra and the Teen Titans into conflict, and also Hive is in there. We go back and readdress the Hive contract. We see Dick Grayson, who had previously abandoned the Robin identity, along with Wally West abandoning the Kid Flash identity. Well, Dick puts on a new costume and takes on a new persona, and this is Nightwing. We see that for the first time here. We meet one of Slade Wilson's other children. This would be Joseph Wilson, and he would go on to be the character Jericho. He had the ability to become intangible, take over a person's body, and possess them, basically turn them into a puppet. Not unlike when Boston Brand, aka Deadman, does it, only you're not necessarily unconscious when Jericho takes you over. So you're aware of the fact that something is happening and you can't control yourself, and there's nothing you can do about it. While Jericho is a hero, it's a great power to have. When Jericho falls into the edge villainy, then it becomes a much scarier power. In any event, the Judas Contract shows Deathstroke, who has used Terra as his infiltration into the Titans, attacking the Titans at their weakest moments. And he takes down Wonder Girl and Starfire and Beast Boy, Changeling, etc., while Raven herself is taken down by Terra. Now, we also see Terra's final descent into madness. It's a great 4-issue arc, takes place through the 3 regular issues of the Titans, and is concluded in the Teen Titans Annual. So, Judas Contract is definitely number 4 in my top 5s. My final entry for DC Comics in my all-time favorites is the Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga. It's really hard to slim it down to just 5 stories, believe me. There's so many good ones, like Jim Starlin's Cosmic Odyssey, for example. That's absolutely fantastic and leads into the New Gods. But it is, in fact, the presence of one of those new gods, Darkseid, the apocalyptic god of evil. I mentioned him earlier. Darkseid awakens in the 30th century and moves as a shadowy power behind the scenes. He steals magic objects and absorbs the magical power into himself to greatly increase his own personal power. And then he goes on a tear through the universe. He takes the planet Daxam, where Mon-El comes from. Under a yellow sun, Daxamites have identical powers to Kryptonians. He moves the entire planet under a yellow sun, exchanging it with his own planet Apocalypse, the now dead world where nothing lives. He then mind controls the 3 billion Daxamites and sets them loose as a Kryptonian-level army across the galaxy. The Legion of Superheroes, a band of teenage heroes who number about 30 characters at that time, plus their allies, the Legion of Substitute Heroes, the Heroes of Lalor, the ICC, and so on. All of these characters come together, and it is all that they can do to stem the tide of Darkseid's army. Darkseid is actually defeated as this story comes to its conclusion, but before he leaves, he imposes a curse on the Legionnaires, and that curse from that story retroactively affects a much earlier story centering around the character Validus. Now, if you've not read the story, I won't spoil how that goes down, although the story is actually several years old, so in any event, you'll want to pick up any of the compilations of the Great Darkness Saga and see for yourself just the magnitude of this story. The epic adventure, it's fantastic. The Legion of Superheroes have 30 characters that you can get behind. Some of them you'll like more than others. I have my favorites. Mon-El, for example, Wildfire, Timberwolf, Block, Lightning Lad, Saturn Girl, and the list goes on. And there are characters that I'm a little more lukewarm to. Never been a really big fan of Starboy, for example. But you'll find your own favorites. It's an excellent story. I strenuously recommend picking it up. So, there you have it. 5 of my all-time favorite DC stories. A lot of that takes place in the Bronze, Late Bronze, and Copper Age. By no means do I mean to slight any of the other fantastic things that ever happened in DC Comics, like, for example, the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul in Batman, which is also fantastic. Or, for that matter, The Killing Joke, where we see Barbara Gordon paralyzed by the Joker, and so on, and so on. DC Comics has given us a lot of fantastic stories over the course of 76 years, but that's 5 of my favorites. Maybe we can get together on the internet, look me up on Facebook, reach out to me on YouTube, drop me a message at our website. You could tell me what your 5 favorites are. Or drop into the store and hey, even if I'm working, I will take a minute and spend a little time with you. So thanks for joining, and tune in when I talk next about my top 5 favorite independent comics.